Hey all, here OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the Plimpton L1. This is a brand that we have checked out in the past with some of their more affordable Android tablets, but this is a wireless CarPlay and Android Auto dashboard, and just add a slightly larger screen for purposes like navigation as well as controlling music. It can be useful for cars that don't have a built-in smart display, such as a Tesla, for example, but you want to add this onto a slightly older vehicle for not too much money. This is actually one of the more budget CarPlay models out there, selling for only around $50. One of the benefits of a kind of dashboard design like this one is it's extremely easy to set up. There is no additional kind of wrangling around with cables. You don't have to disassemble anything with screws. You just pop it on, very similar to traditional satellite GPS units, which have kind of fallen out of fashion because the functionality is now found in most of our phones. You can just download Google Maps, and this is pretty much playing on that concept, because there is no actual GPS chip built into the system here anymore. Instead, it's just borrowing that function from your phone and then just having a larger screen be mirrored. And it works with both Google Maps as well as Apple Maps on iOS and Android devices. You can even answer phone calls since it is, again, basically paired to your phone. So this one here measures 7 inches diagonally, and the resolution is actually quite standard on these CarPlay units. It's around 1024 by 600p. So it's close to HD resolution, just a touch lower, and it's not super high by tablet standards, but it's actually right on point with a lot of these CarPlay units out there. On the inside, we have just a quick user guide, as well as the actual CarPlay display itself. Further down below here, we have all the mounting accessories. Here's the 3M sticky pad to pop onto your dashboard, as well as kind of the mount. And there's also going to be an aux 3.5mm cable if you want to connect it to your car's stereo speakers for things like music, for example. And there's also just a standard USB Type-C power supply with a car cigarette lighter end that is attached. Quick look at the build. It is very similar to just a kind of 7-inch Android tablet with a capacitive touchscreen, but there's no cameras on this particular model. Some of the more expensive models try to integrate those features on the back, so you can also record video of what's happening outside of your windshield, but it's not found on this more budget model. It is what it is. I do like the fact there's some of this kind of carbon fiber-like texture going onto the plastic. That seems to be a recurring theme even on the charging adapter that we saw there from earlier. And despite the plastic frame, it actually doesn't feel too flimsy. There's a bit of weight to it, surprisingly. And on the spine, you have access to the Type-C port for power, as well as the aux jack, and also there's the micro SD card slot for expanding on the built-in memory. There's a manual power key there on the very top, and then nothing else on the other side. There's just a kind of loudspeaker, as well as the mounting adapter. Attaches onto the base, something like this. You can adjust the tilt up and down accordingly, but you can't really swivel it on the hinge there. So here's what the CarPlay device looks like when mounted inside of a vehicle. Under direct sunlight, visibility might be a little bit more difficult just because of the non-laminated screen, but as a whole, I would say it's not shabby. You can still mostly get by in terms of navigation. And impressions here being that it does power up extremely quickly since it isn't really running on a more advanced OS like full Android. And that's good because you just start the engine and you're ready to go. There's no waiting that you have to do for the system to then initialize or anything like that. Simple time and date stuff that you can set up for the first time, as well as volume adjustments. And the 4 tiles here correspond to CarPlay for iOS devices, Android Auto for Android devices, Phone Link for things like mirroring your phone's display wirelessly onto this. You can think of it as kind of a small HD TV of sorts where you can screencast. So I guess if you really wanted to, you could even mount this onto the back of your seat for maybe a child that is on the back, and they're able to then maybe enjoy some TV shows, things like that. And overall touchscreen responsiveness also seems to be fair, actually working a little bit faster than I expected. You can also adjust things like EQ for sound, even changing what type of audio you're trying to play back. Display settings here, you can even adjust things like contrast, as well as saturation. Here are all the different languages, by the way, that you can also change into for system menu options. The display itself also seems to be decent quality. It is a, thankfully, IPS panel, which means that viewing angles aren't too shabby as you're tilting it and looking at from different angles. At least colors don't really wash out like TN screens, which were cheaper to manufacture from years ago, but it's not a fully laminated display. So there is still a slight gap between the glass and the actual screen on the inside, as you can tell, which can add to a little bit of reflection. And the kind of glossy surface also doesn't necessarily help there. It does attract a little bit of fingerprints and smudges. So if they can make it a matte display or fully laminated, I think that would would of course be even better, especially in outdoor conditions, since this thing will be in the car and the sun most likely. However, it is what it is for a budget model like it. You can also change things like the, again, time and date over here, and even the background wallpaper, it looks like. You have a couple options to play around with. I'm going to try on the mirror mode here first, and it tells us to scan the QR code, download the APK, and then follow those instructions. And afterwards, the app will be installed. That being said, I would have preferred if they just use a more standard built-in protocol, making it compatible with built-in Android protocols like Smart View on Samsung Galaxy devices, for example. There's already kind of a built-in window there just for pairing this to many of the smart TVs out there on the market, but they are requiring you to use kind of a third-party app. We have to also turn on mobile hotspot on this device and also set your device name to car, as well as the password to 1234567 And once you turn that mobile hotspot on with the app they're running in the background, you'll be able to then see a pop-up that says start recording or casting with mirroring. Tap on start now, and the device will then try and connect to your phone. Only recognize a device that's called car, and then it will pair basically the screen to your phone. But again, it is functional, and we have a view here that seems a little bit squished if you're in the portrait orientation, to be honest. The horizontal orientation, it actually might fare a little bit better, as you can tell, but still seems to mostly show a little bit of black bars on the top sides, as you can tell there, but not bad. And it can be technically just a little bit more spacious, I guess, or at the very least, since this thing is mounted onto your dashboard, it may be a little bit easier to view back. The latency also seems to be mostly acceptable, maybe just a split-second delay, but not too bad. And you can also do something like a little bit of gaming on a larger display there as well, as you can tell. And there we are. Compared to what is happening on the phone's display itself, I would say it's not too laggy per se. Very similar to just a, again, wireless screencast function on a TV. It may consume a little bit less power because your phone's display can technically be turned off and you're just using the screen at full brightness of the navigation panel here. And that allows you to maybe let your phone run a little bit less hot, especially in the summer heat. So it's basically just offloading some of the work that your phone does onto another device here. And otherwise we can tap on the dot to just leave that UI. Let's also take a quick look at the Android Auto function here next. And after a second or two, it'll say, welcome to Android Auto. Continue setup on the device. It says requires permission to access all of the kind of location services, as well as microphone from the phone side. We'll tap on OK. And by the way, one thing I forgot to mention earlier there is in the screen mirrorcast mode, the touchscreen function is not accessible from the device over here. So you still have to control things like if you're gaming from the phone side, but in the Android Auto application, basically, you are able to, of course, interact using the touchscreen directly. So tap on continue. You can also use services like Spotify, so it becomes an alternative to something like the Spotify car thing that was discontinued recently, but allowed you to play back music and control it using a smaller screen on the dashboard of your car. And this, of course, has similar functionality to that, mainly, again, geared at just controlling things more easily on the inside of your car when tethered to your phone. And I have to say that the integration with CarPlay as well as Android Auto is a little bit more robust than I was expecting. To be honest, this is a application that I haven't really explored in the past, and it looks like there have been quite a few developments in this regard, and I've just historically used Google Maps and mounted my phone directly, but via this method there's a whole new UI that pops up, and you're able to tap on icons more quickly. The buttons are enhanced. You can even tap on the microphone there to access the assistant, going into additional settings to show different types of notifications as they pop along. Even the wallpaper, interesting enough, inside of the UI of Android Auto can also be set. So this is independent of what we saw there from earlier, and you can have a little bit more customization here. And there's also quick widgets for things like weather, as well as news feed that you can tap on here, reminders, to-do lists, which are synced over from your phone's calendar, as well as game snacks. That's kind of strange, since these games aren't really installed on my phone per se, but they're more like web apps that are extremely simple in terms of the GPU and also UI, and you can play it back as long as you have internet connection. And by the way, because the CarPlay here is connected via both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, you still have to connect to the internet using the cellular data for your phone. So for some of these services, including Assistant, because again the Wi-Fi is already being occupied by the connection to the monitor, you would still have to rely on mobile data. So just keep that in mind. But for things like navigation, if you have maps downloaded onto, again, Google Maps offline, you can still do some of that using this method as well. A slight momentary lag here and there, since it's all done essentially using kind of a screencast function of sorts. Something else to note is once you are paired with your phone, if you tap on Bluetooth, you're able to make calls just by tapping on the dialer pad with the Bluetooth icon there. And you can also tap on audio output to switch into modes including AV as well as FM transmitter mode. So if you want to, again, connect to your car's stereo speakers, you can have this act as a FM transmitter. And once you have Google Maps opened on your phone, you'll also activate the corresponding screen here on Android Auto, and you're able to navigate with a virtual keyboard on the larger display, or you can use voice input, and we're able to track different locations as well as check out more information, including when it's open as well as the time to get to this particular spot. You can also set it to avoid things like highways, tolls, things like that, very similar to on the version of the app on your phone. Plus access other points of interest, including, let's say, gas stations, as well as safe location travel plans, things like that. What is kind of neat though is aside from being able to access the assistant down below here, you can also tap on this icon to bring in a split screen view, and on the edge you're able to instantly jump into favorited locations as well as access some widgets for things like Spotify playlists as well as podcasts that you can play along, in addition to doing navigation at the same time. And it will switch back and forth between the audio and the directions. For example, if you are nearing a intersection that you're supposed to make a turn at, it will then lower the volume and kind of momentarily pause the music or podcast, and then after it's spoken the directions, it will then resume playing the music here on the side. And of course, as there are more updates to Android Auto, it gets automatically downloaded onto your phone. It's part of the Android operating system for most recent devices made in the past 3 or 4 years, I would say. In fact, if you jump into advanced system settings, into Android Auto, you're also able to choose some other profiles, including whether you want a system dark mode versus light mode, as well as whether you want to change the layout as well. Navigation bar to be on the bottom here instead of on the side that we saw there towards the beginning, as well as what types of widgets and, again, settings you want to pass through to the display here. That being said, one thing to keep in mind is the strength of the GPS signal is going to vary based on the phone that you're using, since it's technically still using the GPS chip, borrowing that from your mobile device. So if your phone has slightly weaker antenna reception, then that's probably an area where it may not necessarily beat a traditional car sat-nav unit. For most modern devices, I would say, as long as you have location services turned on, after about a minute or so, it should lock into enough satellites that it gets you a decent enough experience. Although one limitation of Android Auto is you are tied to the kind of Google ecosystem of apps. So just keep that in mind. If you've struggled with Google Maps for whatever reason in the past in your specific region or spot that you're trying to get to, then this isn't necessarily going to become a replacement per se. So here's the CarPlay dashboard, which also is relatively easy to operate with the large icons. We can swipe back and forth for accessing features, including the dialer pad. And overall responsiveness seems quite similar to Android Auto. You can also connect to this just by going into settings on your iOS device, jump into CarPlay, and it will locate nearby devices, finding this particular Plimpton L1, and you're pretty much ready to go. Recently opened applications are here on the left, as well as the battery percentage remaining on your phone. And of course, in this particular mode, just like on Android Auto, you can turn the phone's display off, and the process here will still be working on the dashboard. You're also able to exit out of this UI, go into Apple Music, podcasts, audiobooks, again, quite similar to what we saw functionally speaking to before. And the page on the left will also show your incoming notifications, as well as any currently playing music that you control as well. Similarly, you're also able to leverage Apple Maps for navigation just by borrowing the GPS chip built into your iOS device, and there's also a virtual keyboard if you prefer for text entry and search as well. So working quite well, but again, similar to the Android Auto situation, you are forced to use kind of the Apple ecosystem of apps supporting this mode, including Apple Maps in this instance. That said, GPS reception is generally not going to be a problem on most recent generation iPhones, and the software for Apple Maps has definitely gotten significantly better compared to the early days where it was lagging behind competitor like Google Maps, which had more of a head start when it came to development. But these days, it's actually quite evenly matched, and for the most part, you won't find too many issues when it comes to just getting around. So there we have it. That's the Plimpton L1, one of the most cost-effective and budget CarPlay/Android Auto dashboard devices, essentially kind of a wireless screen that you just set onto your dashboard. turning an older vehicle or car into more of a smart-enabled model by being able to connect to your phone for incoming notifications and calls more easily without fiddling around with your device that might be in your pocket, as well as sparing some of the battery life on here as well, since the screen can be turned off, while presenting a slightly cleaner view for purposes like navigation. So overall, really is not bad, and again, as long as you are able to rely on an existing smartphone that you have for using the GPS chip inside, and you're okay with using cellular data if you are trying to access some of those smart features like the assistant, I think it still provides you with a pretty good experience for, again, not too much money. And by the way, if you have a micro SD card inserted, you can also use it as an MP3 player to just play back what is currently located on the card as well. The responsiveness of the system, even though there are slight moments of lag and delay at times, seems to mostly hold up. It's relatively easy to operate, and at least the boot up times are pretty quick. That being said, one trade-off, despite the convenience, is the cable here on the side, which I think is mostly fine, but it of course will stick out from the edge to then plug into your car cigarette power supply, as opposed to being completely hidden from view if you are having a system that is directly mounted inside of your car's centerpiece. Certainly is something that you can consider if you want a really easy device just to mount and just be ready to go without having to fiddle around with removing anything in the car. So you can check out more details if interested in the links down below. For now, that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the extremely affordable budget Plimpton L1 CarPlay / Android Auto wireless display.